Good evening, my metagalactic Metracanthosaurus. Let's be so for real now. I think Bringer and Joyous are still alive. I also think Belle and Wise are a new universe cycle version of them, or ether-based clones of them. Either way, their stories are profoundly connected, and it's only possible because the timeline is in a line. It's voluptuous and caked up. In the land of jiggle physics, even the buildings bounce, but this doesn't stop the ZZZ devs from tackling the new frontier through science fantasy. I mean, in the real world, science is on the precipice of understanding what spacetime really is, and exploring it without the shackles of technological limitations gives way to fantastical sci-fi world building. I know I sound bonkers, but hear me out. The lore already tells us it's possible. The hollows were the first thing I started looking at because, well, they're there and they're always there. We know now that hollows aren't black holes, and after careful observation, we can say for certain, hollows have properties. They don't interact with light in a typical sense. They glow, they don't cast shadows, light can pass through to some degree, but light created within the hollows doesn't escape. There are shadows within the hollow from the sun, moon, and fake moon, which are all visible. Most of the time they're distorted though. We also know that they're called hollows because they convert all normal matter into etheric matter and then it homogenizes and the hollow becomes hollow. We also see how the hollows function under different situations. When Miyabi slices the hollow in Chapter 5, we see a buzzing distortion, smoke, and the bubbles suddenly appearing, changing size, and then disappearing. This is eerily similar to a concept in physics, but it's not a black hole, something darker. Etheric matter and hollows really seem to be closest to dark matter. The ether crystals are most likely inspired by beryllium. I thought it was iodine for a while, but while I was looking into it, I found that beryllium crystals have a high concentration of dark matter, and they're being used for researching it, like in the real world. It also coincides with the ether crystals in the game. I think this means we are going to have 8 or 9 crystal colors by the end of the game. This is also mirrored in the elements that the agents use. My intuition is telling me all the elements are different types of etheric matter, with the ether element being misdirection. While the hollows are always shown as black holes, we know that they're different because this upgrade text in the prophecy says they're different, and I'm trusting the prophet on this one. You gaze at the sky thinking about things unseen. An island carried away by twisters through the dusky atmosphere, a quantum satellite teleporting when it isn't being observed, a black hole inside a hollow. The hollows behave like hyperspheres passing through the third dimension, though. We also have a significant amount of moments that allude to higher dimensions. Most of them are lighthearted, but the Miyabi mention is definitely foreshadowing for the main plot. This is huge because there is a significant amount of evidence to suggest that dark matter exists in the fourth dimension. We also see that the core skill upgrade material is called higher dimensional data. We also get offhand comments about the higher dimensions being a habitable place. Even if it's sarcastically, we can only interpret it that it's connected to the technology that Eridu and the old civilization already developed. We also see it in the DMs with Nekomata and Lighter. They talk about it when you miss their hangout event. Nekomata says something about a video store in another dimension, and Lighter says, next time, let's just avoid any other dimensions. Interesting. The most curious one, though, is in the cutscene for getting Miyabi to promote the video store. She contemplates this very thing, but also confirming that the people of New Eridu think that the fourth dimension is habitable in some sense, because she is asking if there is someone from a higher dimension watching over them. She is curious about this. Little does she know that she's correct.
In a way, we, in our attempt to slice through the hollows of New Eridu, are engaging in a similar futility. Are we being watched from a higher dimension?
But now, who could be watching them from a higher dimension? Who is spending space and time to spy on Phaethon, and how are they doing it? I think there's 3 characters confirmed outside of the time loop, in the fourth dimension and potentially spying on Phaethon. I'm definitely going to update this if there's any new lore, but for now, we know Professor Archie is outside of the time loop. This is most likely how he became the creator. He's been there and hasn't been there for every iteration of this universe and this story as it goes through each time loop. I know, it's a mouthful, but please take 2 seconds and consider that in the lore teaser, when they said he was missing for an entire era, they were talking about an entire universe cycle, not necessarily the era of Eridu. The interesting thing about the theory of time that Zenless zzzero developers really decided to dig into is that time is not a loop, and it's most plain to see when we look at how the story is delivered to us. We bounce between the past and the present while still maintaining the ability to manipulate time. I mean, when the game first launched, players were still able to manipulate time, there was just few more steps. Time functions according to Newton's second law, so every action has an equal reaction or whatever. Let's visualize it with Newton balls. Every time there is a story in the present, there's an equal sized story in the past. Just saying, I think it's a little uncanny, and this much thought cannot be a coincidence. Now that we know part of the story is taking place in a higher dimension, and at least one character is there where time is tangible, what does that mean for the space-time distortions? We see the signs most frequently in the Outer Ring, but Hollow Zero has the most severe distortions of all the hollows in the story. We also see the space-time distortions in the Melano Hollow with the ability to adjust it with light. Absolutely bonkers, but this will come into play later. So for now, this confirms that the devs are using a theory about the fabric of the universe being malleable but having memory. There's some absolutely bonkers real-life inspiration for this too. The LISA project, which is set to launch in 2035, is the Laser Interferometer Space Antenna. So it's a laser triangle that each arm is 2.5 million kilometers long, and it's reading the gravitational waves versus gravitational tsunamis. It allows the scientists to study how the waves in the fabric of space-time remember how they are distorted, and to deeply study the celestial events that cause it. Because the things we have on Earth, the arms aren't long enough. I mean, it needs to be 2.5 million kilometers long. This also leads into what happened during the fall of the old capital. When Hollow Zero expanded, there were space-time distortions, and the way the hollows function means it leaks out into the surrounding areas. We can use the logic already shown in-game that space-time holds memory to finally have clarity on the 10-year skip in the timeline. We know the time distortions would affect the area surrounding Hollow Zero, so Eridu and areas like the Outer Ring and areas we haven't been to yet. The expansion during the fall of the old capital could have been enough to push New Eridu into the new place in the timeline, but we also see it moving the other direction. So there's a whole 20 years in the timeline that are just fuzzy. This has to be connected to the time travel plotline. It was foreshadowed in the hidden side mission connected to the sanctuary part of Ray's research log in the lost items from the old capital. That's when we find out that Dylan and Professor Joyce from White Star Institute are working on creating time travel. But how would they even do that, and why is it such a big theme in the game? We see the most evidence for time travel in the visual storytelling. In cutscenes, the outlines of characters become distorted within the hollow. It has these small horizontal spikes that vibrate. This is very similar to the distortion that happens to the hollows when the skin or membrane is damaged. The distortion looks like VHS generational distortion. We see it with the first generation in those instances, but then we can go to the 7th generation, a very important number in the game, and we get to see exactly how the Zenless zzzero cutscene during the prologue would happen. All of the events of the game are already on tape. If time is moving backwards or bouncing around, it would also explain the story tapes already being on the shelf in the staff room. Time moves according to Newton's second law of motion. The Big Bang and the inevitable heat death of the universe can be seen in Newton's theory of absolute time and absolute space, which also gives absolute scale. This means that the universe isn't looping. Well, the story again affirms that time in the story is not looping, but bouncing back and forth. There's a theory that Belle and Wise are going to get a rewind ability, and they're going to be able to manipulate time. I love it, especially with them becoming playable agents. I linked it below because it's definitely worth checking out. I love it. Now, if a character were to find a way to time travel, they have an easy way within the hollows. The hollow fissures look like wormholes and function like them. We also know they move through time to some degree. In Hollow Zero, the changing the areas by going through a hollow fissure can change the time of day and location. We also see in the prologue during The Fallen, that's when Anby is jumping through the hollow membrane and she pops out during the day. Well, she jumped through at night. That is exactly how wormholes work in the real world. The best visual that I could find for a real-life wormhole was in Interstellar. But look at how similar it is to the hollow fissures in ZZZ. They're both spherical and they both have that area of distortion around them. We could also look at how the bubbles coming out of the ones in ZZZ, they are moving in and out of the third dimension like the hollows do. The pattern of movement is very consistent. Speaking of holes in Hollow Zero, what is up with the mysterious voice? Who do you think it is? It's not coming through a fissure, but through a crack in space-time. We can see the jagged edges and light flashing out. There are several people it could be, and I think it's more than one person that can be encountered. They have to be one of the characters who exist outside of the time loop, and the one talking about the Bang Boo and the Bang Boo. We know Carolarna and Sunbringer are the most likely candidates, but what do you think? This has an uncanny resemblance to Belle and Wise not just finding the hollow fissures, but directly affecting the hollows and creating fissures. Belle and Wise's ability most likely comes from being created or modified at Helios Academy. They use the HDD as a tool to determine what to do and navigating the hollows, but the power comes from them inherently being connected to the ether element. I mentioned a few times that I think they're actually clones of Sunbringer and Joyous. This is mostly just a hunch, but hear me out. Their hair is similar, like literally just grow out Belle and Wise's hair. That is Sunbringer and Joyous's hair. They have similar personalities, similar interests, and they're both like, the four of them are super geniuses. Like, it's bonkers what they know. And in this interpretation of the lore, it's clear that the devs were planning on having them be playable the whole time. Now for my big theory. I know, that's what you're actually here for. I'm sorry it's not going to be like so straightforward and decisive as it usually is, but please understand that these are the two things that I think are most possibly going to happen within the story. I hope you enjoy. I think Professor Arky is the creator, that he is an incarnation of a Jinn particle. Okay, well, let me explain what that is. A Jinn particle is a particle that exists in an enclosed loop outside of the timeline, but in a loop of time, infinitely going around and around, because every instance of time is constant, it's infinitely existing, it's everlasting, it's always in that instance. So anytime you move through a timeline forward or backwards, the same moments will occur. I know, absolutely mind-blowing. I hate this. I hate that science is like saying this, but whatever, we still have free will in some sense. We don't know what's gonna happen next. Those narrators in ZZZ do, because they are also outside of the time loop. Now we need to discuss who the narrators of the lore teaser are and who is the person watching the tapes.
Oh, that's a lot of key terms, even ones on us. Let's see. Huh? Why'd you close the index?
There's no time for games. Fairy, search for preset keywords.
The narrators of the lore teaser are doing something similar to Professor Arky. They seem to be the ones who started the tape when Fairy was activated. The sound of that, compared to the sound of a tape winding, it's uncanny. I also think the narrators are going to be Belle and Wise or Sunbringer and Joyous. I mentioned it before, I'm leaning more towards Sunbringer and Joyous, but just as believably as Belle and Wise. Now, I think it's Bringer and Joyous because she calls him a killjoy, which is perfectly suited to his stern personality and her silly personality.
There's no time for games. Fairy, search for preset keywords.
Killjoy?
But then Belle and Wise have the same personalities. And it could give deeper meaning to I remember her, like it's her past life and it's going to be an extra super sad background lore. We don't know anything about what they did after they got their Void Hunter title, but I think they would choose to put an end to Hollows for good if they could. If it's Belle and Wise, that means they created Fairy and Friends, and they are also in the Jinn particle style time loop. At what point did they get the ability to travel back in time, and are they using the tapes to do that? We haven't gotten it in the lore yet, but it would mean that the entire story is moving backwards and the tapes are the things moving in chronological order. Either way, the main goal is to put an end to the Hollows. Whichever pair it is, they are the ones who are watching the tapes. It also shows that Professor Archie is creating the same disaster in every bounce between universe iterations or every cycle in the time loop. It also makes the goals of the narrators more methodical and routine. The quote from the Zenless zzzero prologue cutscene, "In the end it comes down to this," or whatever it is, shows us that the Hollow Zero disaster that happens in their vision is something that affects time in both directions, like the one that caused the fall of the old capital. I think they could be fighting the Hollows with some kind of light, because they are coming from another dimension, and we see it firsthand in the Melano Hollow. I think the ethereal hive mind is also using this kind of crazy fantasy technology to be able to do this from the fourth dimension. The space-time of the universe functioning like a quantum computer is a phenomenal theory. I love it. Here's the thing, quantum error correction is inherent in this theory. So the qubits of the universe check themselves, and that's why they're, not constantly just unraveling, like things are pretty consistent. But that's also what makes quantum computers just a little bit more sensitive. Like, a stray photon will cause a qubit to decohere, and then everything kind of just stops. What if both sides are using this type of technology because that's what it's available to them? So we've seen it literally happen in the game before. I think we're going to get more clarity on this at the beginning of Season 2, but I'm hoping there's some very inconspicuous details to give us insights in the Part B epilogue of Season 1. What do you think? Are they clones, a new time loop cycle version, or a secret third option? If you made it this far, please subscribe and tell me all of your thoughts. I will see you in the next one, where I'm going to discuss how the ZZZ writers and devs do storytelling and why it's so good. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.